welcome to another up close video. So this one is looking at 3 brand new Mosaic stencils from Tonic. So they're gorgeous like mandala kind of designs that all have a sort of central focal design and then it all builds out from there. They've seemed to have gone back to their square style of stencil. Obviously it does kind of work better for this sort of design, but the previous release, oh no, maybe that was 2 releases ago actually, because they had Christmas ones in between, but they had been doing this kind of size of a stencil. But I do like these larger ones actually, because if you like doing art journaling and stuff, and I tend to do it in square journals, this kind of design would fill a page really nicely. Anyway, so there are 3 different designs. So the first one is called Eternal Harmony, and again, yeah, as I said just now, they've all got sort of a central design and then it builds out from there, and they're all like symmetrical to the quadrant, sort of, you know, so that same quarter is repeated all the way around the design, and they all have different design elements within them. So for example, this one has a kind of geometric pointy sort of design within it, and I really like this part. It's a shame you don't get the complete like design, but anyway, this part is like a double tram line with circles inside it, which is quite nice, that you could fit Nuvo drops on them really nicely. All of the designs actually have really good places for your Nuvo drops. Like here you've got sort of dot elements that would be masked off, so you'd potentially not have any ink there, so adding in your dream drops or Nuvo drops or vintage drops or jewel drops, glow drops, anything would work really nicely there. And also their Nuvo crystal gems work really nicely as well. They have I think it was this design. I used the silver petals to sort of highlight this portion of the design, or you could use the water droplets as well, because that's kind of a water droplet sort of a shape, and even the hearts and things, any of the repeating pattern parts would go really nicely with all of the gems that they do as well. So that is the first design, which is called Eternal Harmony. Then the next one is called Dancing Petals, and this one kind of has, it's sort of got a square design here with a sort of puffy, circly sort of a shape in it, and then they've all kind of got a sort of flower in the centre. This is more of a larger pronounced flower, an 8-petaled one, and this has almost got like rainbows in the sides as well. There's loads of different things you don't notice until you start looking at them, and they say on the packaging as well, perfect for your Nuvo products, but don't just think about having to use mediums and inks and all sorts through them. If you've got fine, like really fine liner pens, you can trace this design and do your like Zentangle or Zendoodle through the design as well, or you could just you could even ink it and then outline it yourself and add all of your Zendoodle kind of patterns to it as well. So there's lots of different ways of using stencils like this, and some of the samples I'll show you, I've used the positive and negative of the design as well, so you can actually ink through it and get where the stencil isn't, you get the pattern, or you can actually get this exact pattern by adding your inky things to the stencil and flipping it over and pressing it to get your design as well. So lots of good things to do with them. And then this one is kind of the most intricate of the designs. It's got a lot of fine filigree detail in it. Sorry it's dirty, I was using it with a red Nuvo ink and it's kind of stained it a little bit. This one's got like a cross in the centre, and these portions almost look like they're hearts hiding behind that cross, and it's got a lot of swirly designs, and these gorgeous leaves, they sort of remind me of like peacocks actually. They almost like sort of a feathery design as well. So I think they're really adaptable, these designs. You could really make them really nice and feminine, but again, using them in a simple way, you could make them look more masculine as well. And don't forget, you don't have to use the whole square design. You can actually crop into the design and just use like more one side and not have the pattern centralised in on your card or on your project. And you can also just use portions of the pattern as well. A few of the cards I've just sort of focused like inking on a little bit or focusing on the central section and multiplying it across the card just to give a really different look to the stencil as well. Another thing about Tonic Stencils that I always forget to mention, but I just remembered, is they all have a little tab on the bottom that says Tonic Studios, that sort of, it's like cut into it. But this allows you to know which way round the design is, which, I mean, these are symmetrical, so it doesn't really matter if you used it one way or the other, but with some stencils it does kind of matter, or, you know, if you want to know which way round you inked it so you can place the stencil exactly back over the top for a different kind of technique as well. But the main reason behind this little tab is so you can easily lift it off. You're not having to, like, well, I still tend to go for the corners and stuff, but it's supposed to be that it makes it easier for you to lift the stencil off of your project because you're not having to try and pick it up from the corner. You can grab the little tab and pull it off that way. So I always forget to mention that, so I thought I would. Okay, so those are the 3 designs of the stencils, and I have 8 samples that I've made with these stencils to show you, trying to show you different kind of techniques or ways to use a stencil to make them look a bit different and stuff. However, I have used these stencils in all of these cards, but I just wanted to say, don't think that you have to have these stencils to try out these techniques. You know, these kind of techniques will work with any stencils that you own. So although this is an up-close video looking at these stencils, this kind of portion of just showing you techniques with stencils, you can take them across to any stencils that you already have as well. So I just thought I'd mention that. So I'll move those out of the way. So the first one that I've got here, I was trying to show loads of, oh dear, that's not going to stay. I was trying to show loads of different ways of using the stencils like slightly differently. So this one is using the same design of the stencil but inking it twice after I've moved the stencil. So I had a piece of A5 white card. Okay, so I inked the whole design with Panama Rose and Sliced Strawberry Nouveau Hybrid mini ink pads, and I've actually been using this kind of a brush. I find that these kind of brushes get really crisp designs when you're stenciling because there's a lot of small spaces to try and get into, and if you're trying to use a normal ink blending tool with the foam on, they don't always get into all of the little areas, and these ones are just off of Amazon, but I did see in the Creativation 2020 sneak peeks that Tonic is coming out with their own blending brushes. So if you're a really big Tonic fan, I don't know when they're coming out, but at some point in the next year they are bringing out their own blending brushes, which is really exciting. So firstly I inked the whole stencil on an A5 piece of white card. Then I picked up the stencil and turned it 45 degrees. So the first time I inked it, this cross was up and down in the light pink in the background, and then I've rotated the stencil 45 degrees, and when you do that, obviously these parts of the pattern aren't going to overlap because you've got the squared off portions of the stencil. So I've only inked the central portion, and I came back in with poppy red ink so that it was darker and stood out a little bit more. I might have actually used a little bit of the rich rosewood in the centre just to darken it even more, but only inking that portion in the centre allows the edges to stay the true crisp design of the original inking, but it doesn't matter that the stencil is off at 45 degrees because if you're just stenciling the central section, you know, you're not going to know that the stencil was overlapping in the wrong places. But anyway, I just thought that was a cool technique to use, to just take the same stencil but rotate it slightly and ink through it again and not completely ink through it as well. And then to finish this one off, I just put it in my guillotine. I cut, I think that was maybe an inch or something, or 2.5 centimetres, and then I just cut a random little sliver off. Then I cut another big section, cut a random slither off, cut another big section, a random slither, and then had the final piece, and then I put them back together, leaving that little gap between them, and I actually raised one of them up just to make it look a little bit different as well, and then finished with a sentiment strip die too. So that's a really easy way of using these stencils, or any stencils you have really. Then I wanted to try mixing 2 stencil designs together. So I did one in the background using Panama Rose. I think I was just using Panama Rose, or maybe I went to Sliced Strawberry right in the centre. And so I just inked that entire design again on an A5 piece of white card, and then I took a different stencil. I actually lined it up in the centre and then inked through with purple, again fading it off and not inking the entire design, so that they, I mean, they both have a sort of central circle design to them, so it worked really nicely. And then for this one, I just trimmed the panel into 4 and moved them away from each other slightly just to give a different look, and I finished it off with a circle sentiment to emphasise that circular design. This one is from the Morwenna Beach Bag die set that Tonic brought out, just to sort of finish that central section. So they're basically the exact same technique. This one's just using the same stencil twice, this one's mixing 2 stencils together, and I did raise those panels up as well after I'd cut them. Then, another really easy, simple way of using a stencil is to use glimmer paste through it. So this is the, I think it's Strawberry Champagne that came out in the Blue Blossom colour trend. That's the glimmer paste. And look how crisply that has gone through that stencil. Because Tonic make their stencils a bit thicker, you get really crisp effects when you're using a 3D paste through them, which I really love. So that's how I've got that whole background. And then for the focal element of this, I cut a circle frame using the cross-stitch circles, and I put that directly over the centre of the design, and then I added my sentiment on as well, but it's not quite in the centre now. I trimmed it down so that like the whole sentiment and circle was sort of the centre of the card. But it doesn't actually look that obvious. I thought it would look more obvious than that. But the centre of the actual sort of mosaic design is down here, and it's not quite centred on the card. But I do really like the look of that. You could have done that even more dramatically if you wanted to as well, and maybe cut more off down here so it was really shifted in the design. But I just really love that glimmer paste, and it dries really firm, glimmer paste does. So you want to make sure you wash your stencil straight away, because it really does like set like concrete on there, and it's quite difficult to get off if you let it dry. But if you wash it off whilst it's wet and just use an old toothbrush, maybe with a bit of hand soap as well if you want to, just to scrub all of the glimmer paste off of it. And yeah, once it's dry, it's really sturdy and crisp, but you can still cut it with your guillotine. You can still get all the way through it, and it gives a nice clean edge still, which is really great. So that is that one, and I decided to do it tone on tone. So that's the ballerina pink Craft Perfect cardstock in the background. So that's that one. Oh, and that's a centrepiece sentiment as well. I might as well tell you all the different bits and pieces. So the next one is what I was just saying about like focusing on one portion of the stencil and moving it across the design to create a whole background. So I started off with powdered peach and carrot stick Nuvo hybrid ink pads, just adding random inking just to a plain piece of white card. Then I came back in, I was using the brushes again for this, I came back in with the stencil and the carrot stick and using a heavier hand, and added just that same sort of central portion of the stencil all over the background. So it just kind of gives a completely different look. I mean, if you go back to the first one, it's not the same stencil, but just, you don't think that that is the same sort of design of a stencil, that you can get that sort of design, or you can get this kind of design from it as well. So I just thought that's a good way to show it off. And also, whilst I had the stencil out and obviously an inky brush, I took some of the apricot Craft Perfect cardstock, which was a lovely colour to go with these colours of ink, and I actually added some stenciling to that, and then I've used some of the Susan's Garden Club dies to trim out some flowers from that as well. So it's it's subtle because you can't really tell what the pattern is, but it sort of ties it all together nicely then as well. And the little foliage here is from the mason jar die set, and this central sentiment is from the beautiful bracelets die set as well. I will try my best to link everything in the description below and over on my blog too. but I am kind of forgetful sometimes, but hopefully I will remember to link it all for you. So the next one is, I've sort of put these in order of going from simplest to stepping it up a little bit. So this one, you get 2 cards for the price of 1, really. So you're basically working on this one. And how you do this is you have your piece of card, I know this is green, but you have your piece of card, you put your stencil onto the card, then you spray some water through this, then you take your Nouveau shimmer powders and tap them all over the design to get full like coverage, make sure there's enough powder sort of everywhere, not like too heavy, but you know what I mean, like an even distribution of powder across the design. Then take your water again and spray it again to make sure all of the powder is sort of activated. Then you carefully remove the stencil, and what you're left with on here is this. So you'd have the powder coming through the design of the stencil, but then you can take this inky messy stencil and you can flip it, and you take another clean piece of card and lay it on there. And then what I usually do is I lay it down and then take my roll of kitchen roll and go like this and press it over the top to really press it down. And then once you remove that off of the card, you end up with this background. So you've now got the positive and negative of the stencil. So if you see here where the white is, you've now got the colour on this one. I really love this kind of technique. You've probably seen it quite a few times in my videos. I've done it in the past with the Nouveau Aqua Flows as well. You can do it with any kind of sprays. You can do it with mica sprays, you can do it with ink sprays, you can even do it with water. That's one of my favourite techniques to do with my art journals, because I often use ink sprays in the background of an art journal, and then sometimes you don't want to be too messy. So if you're just spraying a stencil with water, you're only getting water everywhere, but then you flip the stencil, press it into your art journal, and you get this sort of gorgeous ghosted design, because obviously the water will sort of lift the ink and stuff. But that's one of my favourite ways of using stencils. So that is like a 2-for-1 sort of card design, and I'll tell you the colours of Nouveau shimmer powders as well. So I concentrated Blue Blitz into the centre, and then I put Meteorite Shower slightly further out, and then I used Violet Brocade around the edges, so it kind of goes from blue, dark blue, and then into the sort of purpley bluey colour as well. And for these ones, to finish it off, this is another one of the centrepiece sentiments, and this is just a sentiment strip and some of the dragonflies from the, I can never remember the name of them. It was like Butterfly Swirl or Dragonfly Swirl or something like that. They came out a little while ago now, maybe about a year ago. I'm not 100% sure, but again, I'll try and link them below. And I just added a few of them just to sort of add some extra interest to the card. Then this one is using that same technique of taking the sort of negative design of the stencil. However, I used it more purposefully in this, and I used a mixture of Solar Flare shimmer powder and Lunar Rocket shimmer powder, which is the grey and the yellow, and I just tapped them onto so I had the stencil just on my glass cutting mat, sprayed it with water, tapped the shimmer powders onto it, and then sprayed that with water again. But then I moved the stencil to another part of my mat, took a little piece of card, just sort of a little square of white card, and then pressed that onto the inky stencil, pulled it off, and you got the perfect design, almost as if you used a stamp really. And then once, obviously I did that 4 times for this card, then once they were dry, I just trimmed them out. So 3 of them I trimmed right up to this flower design, and 1 of them I left with this sort of big scallopy circle around it. And then for this one I layered them on top of each other but offset them. So you can see that it's sort of offset, because these petals were supposed to line up between the scallops, just to give a different look. And then I just added the other 2 onto the card as well. And this was where I'd used the Silver Petals Nouveau Crystal Gems, and I just highlighted between the biggest and the medium size, or I mixed the biggest and the medium size to highlight that central flower design of these 2. And then, because it's quite nice to have things in 3s on cards, I just used the tiniest size of them to create or mimic that kind of 8-petal flower just on there as well. And then I just used a sentiment strip to finish that off. and I shadowed it with silver mirror card to mimic or tie in that shiny silver from the gems. And the background of this one, I think it was a different stencil I used to what the middle came out of, but I just used Metro Grey Nuvo Hybrid ink pad. It's one of the big ones, and again one of those blending brushes, and I just added random little areas of pattern just to give the background a little bit of interest. And to tie the Lunar Rocket shimmer powder in, all I did was spray a little bit of water onto my mat, tap some of that powder in, mix it up with a paintbrush, and then splattered it on the background to give that kind of effect as well. Then the final one that I have done is using glitter with the stencils. You might have seen my video. I did a sped up video using the stamp and stencil collections that came out. I think it was on, it was on the Tonic blog as well, so you might have seen that. And I used the stamp and then I used the stencil to add glitter, but obviously in this case you're just using the stencil, so it's simpler. But I told you all the steps to use in that, I'm pretty sure. So the way you do this kind of look, which is completely covered in glitter, that is all glittered on there, is you take your double-sided adhesive sheets. That can be like the Craft Perfect actual like A4 sheets, or it can be a really wide roll of double-sided adhesive. You stick that onto a piece of white cardstock. Then you take your stencil and you take your Clear Mark or Perfect Medium or Versamark ink pad and you press that all over your stencil. Then you turn the inked side upside down and place that onto the exposed adhesive on your cardstock, and then that ink stops your stencil from sticking too badly to your adhesive sheet. I mean, if it does stick a little bit, you can just use adhesive remover, or like I think nail polish remover works as well to get that sticky off your stencil. But if you ink it all with the sticky ink, it's fine, it comes off really nicely. I have a feeling someone did it with soap or something years ago when this technique was around before. I'm sure someone rubbed like soap on their stencils so that it would come off. But anyway, just something to stop it from sticking too much to the adhesive. Then you take, well, in this case I actually took some Mermaid Parade star confetti and sprinkled it into a few of the larger areas in the design. Then once that was in place, I took the Mermaid Parade glitter and added a circle of that to the centre of the design, and just took a little bit in my fingers and sprinkled it out into the rest of it so that I'd get a nice blend with the next colour. Then the next colour I used was the Bluebell from the Blue Blossom colour trend, and you want to make sure you burnish all of this in really nicely, and use a little blusher brush to brush off all the excess. Once you're sure you've got the excess off, you can remove the stencil, which should remove really nice and easily because you added the ink to it. Then you want to take a high contrasting colour to the colours that you've used for your actual design. So I just used ice white glitter, and then you just add that all over, burnish that in, and then you're left with a completely glittered piece with this gorgeous intricate design on it. Me and my mum used to do this a lot with wide like lace. It looks really cool with lace, but obviously because lace is lumpy and bumpy, this gives a much crisper kind of result doing it like this. And you can also, if you haven't got intricate stencils, you can also use the waste, like the backing sheet from double-sided adhesive sheets, and you can die cut that with an intricate die and use that to place onto here. And obviously because that's a release paper, you don't need to add any ink to it to get it to remove nicely, because it just will. So I think that's a really cool technique. And then I just finished this card with another one of those centerpiece sentiments as well. So I hope you enjoyed this up-close video looking at the Mosaic Stencils from Tonic, and I hope you enjoyed all of the samples for showing you different techniques that you can use with either these stencils or other stencils that you might have in your collection as well. So I'm hoping this was an informative kind of video and inspirational maybe, with different techniques that you can use as well. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again in the next video. Bye!